take me back to 2019, 2020. Some news breaks about what is going on with Chinese propaganda and their efforts here in the United States. Rewind a little bit and remind people about what happened.
That's right. Yeah. So it was actually the Free Beacon really led the way on a number of scoops, as well as the Daily Caller, that started to report out, like you said, in that time period around 2019, 2020, that outlets had been receiving large amounts of money. U.S. media outlets had been receiving a lot of money from another outlet called China Daily, which is a mouthpiece for the Chinese Communist Party. It's fully owned and operated by the CCP. And so you started to see some outlets backpedal a little, particularly after 2021, when the Free Beacon had a really big scoop about all of these outlets who were taking millions and millions of dollars from China Daily, and they were getting paid to run Chinese propaganda. It was to include puff pieces about the Chinese regime, to make Xi look good, and to talk up U.S.-China relations in ways that weren't actually, weren't connected to the facts at all. And so you had a bunch of places, New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, who severed their connections with China Daily at that time. But I went back through some FARA reporting, the federal agents' requirements for lobbyists, international lobbyists who give money in the United States. And I noticed that a number of outlets were still taking that money even after 2021.
Yeah, this is interesting. And talk about the form of this here, because it wasn't exactly that they were writing articles in these newspapers. It was sort of like the stuff you see on certain websites that look like they're news stories, but then they're actually not, right?
Exactly right. And so I do think one of the components of this that's really interesting is that the material was presented by China Daily. They're kind of advertorials, right? There was no editorial oversight from any of these outlets. And one outlet in particular, Time Magazine, right, a famous storied U.S. publication, took over $3.5 million since 2021 to allow China Daily to have something called China Watch, which is a segment on Time Magazine's website that runs these advertorials that really just look like bad news articles under the Time Magazine logo.
It's incredible. It's incredible that this happened at all. But as you point out, it happens. Millions and millions of dollars change hands. And it's two major institutions. You mentioned Time. You mentioned the Wall Street Journal, New York Times. Like, a lot of big publications are taking this money. But, the gig is up, right? Like, basically, they get caught.
You would think.
They get caught, and, of course, they're all going to stop taking the Chinese propaganda money. Right, Drew?
You would think, right? Because this was also the time when disinformation and misinformation was, and the